We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromous. This is Byrne Power coming to you on a fine February 2nd day. Yeah, I don't know when you're actually going to watch this, but from Tbilisi, Georgia, somewhere in the middle of the Caucasus, not near Athens, Georgia, but closer to Athens, Greece. And some of you may recall that in January, I was going to go to Florence, Italy for 2 weeks. And this is the first of 4 parts of my trip to Italy. And this will have my deeper reflections of my journey to Florence. And I'll discuss why I went, what I saw, and some of the ideas that I came up with and things that I wrestled with in my trip. The next one is the actual journey, actually the next 2, so there'll be 5 altogether. The next 2 will be over on my Georgian Crossroads and Beyond. I've changed the title slightly to include more travel videos than I have been. You know, algorithms. My show and tell, my slideshow, whatever you want to call it. The next one will be dealing with Pinocchio. And Pinocchio is actually something that is related to the city of Florence and my search for Pinocchio in Florence. And the last video will be the discovery of a small shop that I found in Florence, run by a mask maker who's been making Venetian and Commedia dell'arte style masks since the 1970s, along with meeting his daughter as well, who is continuing his tradition. And we had an interview together, and that'll be very special. Those 2, Pinocchio and the Mask Shop, will be on Gravity from Above. And of course, this is the Anadromist, where we talk about ideas. And so let's talk about ideas. But before we do, it's here, rescued from Alaska. This year, my first ever book, 3 Motions. Motions is an old English word for puppet shows. Indeed, there are 3 puppet plays here written by myself for my Alaskan puppetry classes, including my versions of the medieval classic Everyman, cleverly entitled Every Puppet, and even better, my retelling of the Faust legend, updated for the 21st century, also very cleverly, with a special introductory essay on the meaning of puppetry. Now, are these 50-page booklets physically worth the $25 price? No. But this isn't about material possessions. This is about being part of this odd channel and whatever it is we're doing here, trying to understand things. And these little booklets are unique. Each one is numbered and signed by yours truly. When they sell out, they are gone. I will never reprint them. Special deals if you want multiple copies for a production of your own. Just let me know you're doing it. That's $25 for the USA, Canada, Mexico, most of Europe. There may be some corners, like, I don't know, Russia, etc., and might require some extra money, as would Asia, Latin America, and Africa, or Tonga, or Australia probably. I'll have to add another $5 or so, depending on where you're from. But part of the money goes to my assistants who are shipping these from me from their respective American and European locations. Use the links below, PayPal, GoFundMe, and make sure you add the word book, B-O-O-K, book, to let me know this is not just a normal contribution to the channel, which you can still make. This book will not last long. Help me keep the channel alive. I get no other funding except from you, the viewer. I don't get it from YouTube. I don't get sponsorships. It's up to you. If you appreciate what I do on this channel, get a book. It's a great way to remember what this channel was about, and it'll be something unique because they're all signed and numbered. So that was just a reminder that I really need the help from you with the books. I have, there are 60 left. They started with 80. There won't be any more. And if you want to support the channel, getting one of those books, even if you don't really want it, support the channel. No, you want it. You know you want it. So, why go to Florence? What was I hoping to find? Of course, museums, a lot of old architecture, lots of tourists, even especially the first of the 2 weeks I was there. I realized if I go back to Florence again, do not go the week after the first of the year because you still have lots of tourists. The Italian Christmas season basically ends with Epiphany, so that's the first week of January. It was all right, but it markedly changed after that. So I think in the future what I would do is go there at the beginning of the second week and then stay I actually thought I should have stayed 3 weeks there. But one of the questions is, when you're traveling to a place, and this is part of my travel philosophy, which I've detailed in other places, also accompanying my tourism and reality series, but what constitutes connecting with a place? I am absolutely sure that simply dropping down in a tour bus or an airplane or even on the train for a day or two does not constitute connecting with a place. You may see something, it may spark some thoughts, could be interesting, but trust me, you haven't connected with the place. So one of the things I try to understand is that there are different aspects to a city. So there is the history of the city. And I spent a while ruminating over the history of the city before I got there. I wanted to have some idea of what I was doing. Even then, all the reading I did not prepare me for all the history I encountered along the way. So I would never say I'm a historian of Florence or even well-versed in it, but it gave me an option to connect. Then, of course, there's the tourism of the city. And that's what most people are going to immediately connect with. You're going to be shunted along different paths to see different things. Museums, walks, parks, maybe. Of course, there'll be food and other things, but we'll mention food in a moment. Now, in an Italian city like Florence, but you could say the same of Milan or Rome, fashion is very important. So there are the fashions of the city, and there were these very expensive stores for fashion that were there that I kept. There was almost like this weird torque between the fashion I would see and then the tourists I would see who were not particularly fashionable. There was another whole elite strata that I kept, I could tell I was just barely rubbing shoulders with them, but they were certainly there. Then, along with that is the seedy underbelly. Every city of any size has got a bit of a seedy underbelly somewhere. Even Tbilisi, which seems somewhat uniform when you go around it, you've got the nicer parts of town, but over by the train station, there's one particular area over there, there's a bit of a seedy aspect to it. And you can just tell by the people hanging around in front of buildings and such. But Tbilisi doesn't have that much. It's got a general sense of poverty in some zones, but that's different. Then there's the working city. So usually when tourists come to a town, or a visitor comes to a town, the working city is the last place you will connect to. Because you're not working there, you don't have to really think about it too much for that kind of daily transportation or daily food needs and things like that. But you do need to connect in some way. You do need to find not the little shops that sell you expensive food in the tourist zones, but you need to find actual supermarkets or grocery stores. You need to find places where the people who live there actually have some connection to. Then there's, in a town like Florence, you definitely have a university life as well. And some of the people I met while I was there also were connected to the universities that were there. And these are universities that go way back in time. And of course, one of their major specialties is art. Then there is the industry or the industrial aspects of a town. And in a place like Florence, I just kind of glanced out of my eyes. I was driven around at one point by a man. I saw a little bit from the train going from the airport to the city, but really I had nothing to do with the industrial aspects of the city. And again, that's something that's really advanced level to understand anything about the industries of a city. And then you have the general region. A city is not alone. It's part of a general region. So even New York City is not alone. It's part of the Northeast in the United States. And it is a very specific region of which New York City is a part of it. And the way people act in that region is very different than the way they act further down the coast in what we might call the Piedmont South. Or, obviously then the way people act in Texas or California, certainly Alaska. And so I did get in touch a little bit with the regions. And one of the ways you do get in touch when you arrive at a place with the regional aspects of a location is through the food, which I did do. And all of these things I discuss more in depth in my show and tell, which is on Georgian Crossroads. Go check that out after you watch this. I'm going to Florence, Italy. I have long had a desire to go there because the Renaissance is so important and I wanted to understand it. I've certainly read about the Renaissance more than the average person, not as much as an art historian, but certainly a lot more than the average person who is just kind of going through life. There were quite a few people who lived there. Dante and Machiavelli and Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and Botticelli and and Carlo Collodi, who wrote Pinocchio, and on and on and on. I had a pretty good idea that I was dealing with one of the most historically concentrated places on Earth. So I had no idea, no illusions, that in 2 weeks I was going to get in touch with all of this in any really deep way. I was looking at this as more of a real-world introduction after the reading and looking through books and such that I had done. One of the things that I surprised me a little bit, and I hadn't really thought about it, was I knew I was going to the place where essentially the Renaissance was born. I mean, there are other cities like Siena or Rome where, obviously the Renaissance was there as well. But the thing that struck me was how much of the medieval city was still there, so that one could see the transition between the medieval into the Renaissance, and if you kept looking, into the Baroque era. So, for instance, when you go visit the Duomo, the fantastic cathedral in the heart of the city with the huge dome, the actual building, and several that are designed like that have this kind of stratified layers of brickwork. Brick is probably the wrong word, but it'll do for now. Those are actually medieval structures. The dome is the Renaissance structure, the Brunelleschi's dome. So that was the kind of thing that I started to notice more and more. I know about the medieval period, and as soon as I was there, I was like, oh yeah, that's here too. It's not just the Renaissance. And in fact, if you keep looking around, you start getting hints about Rome, ancient Rome as well. So Florence, absolutely rich city. I hardly recommend doing it. In my other video, I discuss when a person should do this. I'm not doing any of the how-tos in this video. This is more just my thought processes as I was traveling. Now, here is the main thing. Obviously, I am going there to see art and architecture. Now, one of the things after 2 weeks I hardly felt I'd really even touched it. I mean, there was at least 10 places I wanted to go to that I didn't go to in that time. Now, part of it is I'm getting older. I'll be 70 this year. You don't, like go the way you did when you were younger. You take it out more leisurely. But that wasn't the issue. The issue is when you go into a place like the Uffizi Gallery, where the Botticellis and Leonardos are there, you can easily get your eyes satiated with seeing too much. You only have a certain amount of attention span, and particularly for really complex art, you only have a certain amount of attention span in the course of a day. And I would say, as I learned in this time, in the course of 2 weeks as well. That is the total time. I felt like I was a person who had eaten an aesthetic feast day after day after day. And after 2 weeks, I was feeling both full and like I was starting to tell my friends there, I need to come back. Because I feel like I'm just touching it, and there's so much more here. And things that are getting to me and talking to me about the history of the Renaissance, but also the history of our own times and how we got here. So the big question then is, how do you connect to the art? Here's how if you want to go to Florence and not connect to the art, spend a day or 2 or 3 there. I have no idea on earth how anybody can say they saw anything of Florence in a day or 2 or 3. Yeah, and that's what you all see. If you go right now and look up travel to Florence, Florence tourism, visit Florence, one of those things, go to YouTube, and you get all these people who will say how to spend a day here, how to spend 2 days here, 3 days in Florence. And that's it. No one talks about 2 weeks in Florence. It's like we're not supposed to travel like that. And yet I feel like that's one thing, is I made a commitment to be in one place for 2 weeks. Not a commitment, I don't want to see all of Italy. I don't want to see all of Tuscany. I just want to explore this one place, Florence. That's what I was doing there, is I was exploring Florence. So one of the things, if you've been on this channel for a while, you'll realize I have these lectures that I got permission to put on here by the great late art historian, Dutch art historian Hans Rookmaker. And there's one of those where he talks about how to go to a museum, how to see art. And I often put those ideas in practice. The reason I went in January and not September, or certainly not July, is because I knew there would be less people there. Now, having said that, when I first showed up, it was still pretty crowded with Christmas and New Year's season people. Like I say, up until Epiphany, which is, I think, the 6th. Plenty of people still there. I mean, plenty. Lots. Throngs. I remember seeing in a video, I did my research, on how to get into the museums and what to do, someone showing me a video of the crowds around Botticelli's Birth of Venus. It's not quite on the same level as the Mona Lisa, but it is certainly up there as far as things people have to see when they go to Florence. I didn't want that to happen. So one of the first things I said to myself is, let's not put this in the first week, which was a great idea, because even if I had, all those people there would have gotten in the way. I'm sure the room that had the Botticellis would have been a much more crowded, and I just couldn't imagine standing there. In my dream, I wanted a day that was rainy. I wanted a day and rain is a great way to get rid of tourists. Tourists are like, I don't know, they wilt in the rain. They can't take it. They're like, oh, we want a perfect trip. And they curtail their activities, which is wonderful for a person like me who's not going there to be a tourist, but is going there to try to understand something, which I think is a great point of traveling. So I got lucky. I made paid for 2 arrangements to get into the Uffizi Gallery. And one of the things I knew was I went there with the first group at 8:15 in the morning, and I went straight to Botticelli's Birth of Venus. I figured, like, okay, I had to climb so many steps to get there, 3 stories of not little floors, but really massive. It was like the equivalent of like 6 floors of normal between stages in the museum. And I got up there, calmed myself down, went in, and I was alone. I was alone with the Birth of Venus for 10 minutes before anybody else came. And then the first person who came was a Japanese guy, and he was there with me for about 5-10 minutes. And then people started to show up, and it still wasn't very crowded. The second day I showed up at 9:15 in the morning, and it was a better day. There were more people there. It wasn't super crowded. And the images I'm showing you right now show the second day, because I didn't want to interfere with what I was seeing at all on the first day. Now, one of the things that Hans Ruckmacher says about going to museum and looking at art is that you really have to work with it. You have to wrestle with it. You have to really study. He says a painting like Botticelli's Birth of Venus is something like reading a novel. Now, here is the big problem. I have, for many, many years, been looking at that image in books. All sorts of variations on the images, from old black and white copies of it in older books to full-color, spectacular, glossy pages in really large books. So I get there, and there's the painting. Now, you've been looking at it in books. What are you going to do now? Well, here's the thing to remember, and this also comes from Ruckmacher. The books do not have art in them any more than CDs have music on them, or DVDs. Well, DVDs do have the DVDs do have the movie, but they're not a movie being projected on the screen. And so one of the things Ruckmacher says is, first of all, remember that. Secondly, just start looking. He says, at first you're going to say to yourself, what am I doing? Because if you ever go to a museum, do this. Watch people looking at paintings. And you'll see they come up for a moment, they'll look at the painting for maybe, I don't know, a person who really wants to understand the painting, who thinks they're doing a good job, will look at it for like 30 seconds, maybe a minute. A lot of people are so much faster than that. And then they'll look down and they'll read the little inscription. They may look back at the painting for a minute, and then they walk away. So they may spend at most 2 or 3 minutes in front of it. Now, I am alone. I have 10 minutes to spend with the painting. What do I do? Well, Ruckmacher says after a while you're going to get this idea like, what am I doing here? Because you take it all in at once. But he says, just stay there. Don't walk away. And that's what I remembered Ruckmacher saying that, and I just stood there and I said, okay, I think I've seen this because I've seen the photographs in books. But now I have the full-size painting, which is, I don't know, about 2 meters by 1.5 meters, about 6-7 feet long by about 4 feet high. I don't have the exact dimensions, but it's bigger. It's not huge, and it may be a little bigger than that, but it's not a little painting like the Mona Lisa. So I start looking at it, and then I start noticing the textures, and I start noticing, it looks like they had to fold the painting at one point, because you can see kind of a line of something going on in the middle. And then you say, okay, and you start looking, and then you start looking at, for instance, I started noticing Botticelli's feet. And you say, well, that's an odd thing to look at. I said, well, they're at eye level. And then I said to myself, oh, that's really weird. He had trouble drawing feet. And I looked and I said, he had no trouble drawing faces and the human torso. But when it came to feet, Botticelli wasn't perfect. They're kind of squishy looking feet. You're looking at them right now. Those are not great feet. But that's not the point. One of the things that tells me is no work of art is perfect. No artist is perfect. So even the greatest artists in the world have things about their art that you need to just simply say, oh, I wonder what that was going on with that part of it. I'm sure Botticelli came back later and just said, like, oh, I could have done this better. Then I started noticing things like the waves in the water. And I started noticing, particularly with his Primavera, I started noticing the flowers. And one thing I never realized is how many flowers there are in the ground of Primavera, which means spring. And that is also, I would say, my second favorite painting, or maybe actually I like it more. But what's fascinating about that is how much detail, and you can't see this in a photo, how much detail he spent, how much time he spent on not just one or two types of flowers, but literally, I think something like 200 different flower species in the whole painting. And you're going like, wow, that is just fascinating. So you're looking at this, and then you're starting to say, okay, so here's Botticelli's Birth of Venus. And you have this beautiful, beautiful face. And this is one of the things about the Birth of Venus that makes it one of the greatest paintings in the world, is that face. But here's the interesting thing. So now you're in a room with other Botticellis. And, you know, when you're in a book, you just you have to flip from page to page. And looking at this online doesn't count. Especially if you look at this on a phone and think you've seen it, you are clinically insane. Especially if you then go and see the real thing. But I look over and there's a Madonna and Child. And I look over and there's another Madonna. And then I realize I'd known this, but the full force of it hit me. Those were the same face. And what makes Botticelli's Birth of Venus so powerful is that he's put the face of this calm, gracious, beautiful, peaceful face of Mary on Venus. And Venus was always much more of an erotic image, but he's completely changed the meaning of it by doing that. I'm not going to just go on and on discussing that, but that's the kind of thing I started to see. And the more Botticellis I looked at, the more I started to see all of these details. And that's what you get when you have time to look at something. And what you do, that's the kind of thing you do not get when you are in a room with 50, 60, 100 other people all trying to look at the same painting, and you're thinking about where you're going to be eating your food, and you're thinking, it's just like, where do we sit down here? Is there a cafeteria? All this kind of stuff. The answer is yes. The next day I went to the Accademia Galleria, which is the place where Michelangelo's David is. And that was really fascinating. I mean, this is one foreboding piece of work. I mean, he's huge. I mean, he's easily more than twice my size. Just this massive figure. Now, I'd always known that. I've seen photos of people standing next to him. But what I didn't realize is when you're in the presence of David in that gallery, you almost don't want to even go close to it. And in fact, what I noticed was there was a space, a good-sized space in front of David, where people were hesitant to go into that space. Now, again, I'm guessing if you go there in August, or if you go there in May, that space is going to be largely full because there will be 100 people, 200 people, all crowding, trying to look up and see David and get a selfie with him and whatever. Whereas with this case, what would often happen is, for one thing, getting a selfie with David is a little difficult because you've got your face there, and then David is like right behind you, and you're not getting the full effect. So what most people will do is they'll come into the space, they'll pose, a friend will take a photo, And then they'll get out of the space as soon as possible. And then what I noticed is there was other art. There was 2 other rooms, chambers, in this gallery, museum. And they were filled with paintings you didn't want to spend any time with, which was a good move, because after seeing David, who's still in the room basically, this other stuff doesn't matter. This is, just the thing that nobody can tell you about David is just the presence of being in the room with this statue. That's just a fascinating thing. It goes on. There is another room that's really fascinating. It's almost like the studio of a sculptor, but I'll save that for the how I spent my vacation videos. Okay, so one of the things I didn't, when I first got there, I didn't rush off to the Uffizi or to see David. I saved those for the second week. I figured I'll build up to it, which was a really great policy. Again, I have no idea how people show up there and then, bam, it's just like, we got the hotel room, let's go over to the Uffizi Gallery. Even if they're smart enough to get the tickets ahead of time, they go over to the Uffizi Gallery, it's really crowded, you're sitting there going, wow, art, and then you leave. I have no idea how that works. And in fact, I was told about, there were tourists, tour guides rather, they started down in Naples, who actually did this. They started the morning in Naples, went to Rome, and then ended up in Florence, all in one day. Why? What is wrong with us? That we cannot look at anything, that we cannot see anything anymore, that for us there is no difference between seeing it on a cell phone, seeing it in a book, and seeing it live. That we've become so confused that people are actually taking trips like that. What is wrong with us? Which is one of the things that I was thinking about. So the first week what I did is I started off the Museum for Archaeology, and I wanted to see the old Etruscan art. But one of the things that happened was I walked in and there's all of this Egyptian art. And I said, well, I'm not in Florence to see Egyptian art, but since it's here, and this is my first trip, might as well walk through it. And I started noticing, as I was walking through it, kind of a pattern I've seen before, but never really thought about. And that is how the Egyptian art went from abstraction to recognizably human. Now, we can talk about, how the Egyptians were influenced by the Greeks and blah, blah, blah. But that's not, it's something else. Something similar happens from the medieval world into the Renaissance. And we have been seeing a reversal of that. We're going from the human to abstraction. And in fact, the same process happened then.
I am sitting quietly in the National Archaeological Museum of Florence, sitting across from the sarcophagus of Lathia Sayanti, who was an Etruscan noblewoman about 160 years BC. I'm just taking in the quiet. Florence is so noisy, but how many people come here, this a little bit out of the way, to come see Etruscan ruins? I'm sure in the summer quite a few people will come up here, but I am practically alone. There was one other woman who came and went. I just went through all the Egyptian ruins and had some interesting thoughts as I did, mostly about the depictions of humanity becoming less abstract as they went and more particular. And then something very interesting happens at the moment of the Hellenistic age, where the mingling of other religions comes in, and suddenly the figures become very unusual. And then time goes on, and you come to the Coptic period, so these are already Christians, and there is a humanity now in the faces. That's interesting. And the particularity is still there. But it seems there's a move from abstraction to individual portraiture, more features, which is very strange since we seem to be moving in the opposite direction now. Anyway, it's just a quiet moment. And I have the rest of the museum to discover, but since I'm completely alone.
As well. But I thought about this. I said, in a way, everything starts off as an abstraction in art and then kind of congeals into something solid. Then I came to a weird point, and I think I'll do a video on this at some point, where the Egyptian art gets very much like influenced by the Greek, what's going on in Greece, but then suddenly you enter what's called the Hellenistic period. And this is when Hellas, the Greek empire of Alexander the Great, takes over huge parts of the Mediterranean. And, of course, they take over Egypt. And suddenly you get these really weird-looking statues. And these statues do not look like ancient Greek statues. They don't look like Egyptian statues anymore. They look weird. Some of them almost reminded me of things out of H.P. Lovecraft, just weird things bubbling off. And you're seeing some of those images right now. And then I realized, the Hellenistic period, which is kind of between the ancient classical world of Greece and what will be the rising Roman Empire, is an era very much like our own. It is an era where, because of Alexander's conquests, suddenly all of these different peoples with their different gods and religions are smushed together, and weird cults are formed, weird images of the gods, the different names for different gods, sometimes overlapping, sometimes not. A lot of cultural baggage, so Persian, Zoroastrian, dualistic ideas are coming into and developing into this, what will be Gnosticism. The ancient Babylonian religion of astrological worship is moving through this and will eventually come down to us as astrology. All of this stuff is happening, and I realize that's where we are as well. We're in a kind of a neo-Hellenistic period. And this is what I want to make a video about sometime, where essentially all this stuff has been smushed together, which has caused the breakdown of a lot of faiths and the rise of new faiths. And it's in this period, essentially at the end of it, where Christianity is born. And what's interesting is that the Egyptian display goes on a little longer, and then you come to the Coptic Christian art, which is not nearly as perfect in its design as the ancient Greek art, but is truly human, and you're on the way now to the more Christian but abstract elements, symbolic elements, that will form a lot of the cultural sphere of the Middle Ages. So that was just fascinating. Also, one of the things that happens when you're traveling around and doing all of this, and you're looking at history, one of the things you often forget about with history is you keep looking, and after a while, you're starting to think about death an awful lot, because all the work you're looking at is by people who have died. Often in different periods of time, whether it's the medieval period or the Renaissance, and there is a dark side of Renaissance art, and especially in the north, in what we call the lowlands, Netherlands, Belgium and such. There is a very dark side with the art there, and you can see that in people like Bosch and such. But even in Michelangelo's Last Judgment, I mean, if you're in a room with that thing, that just screams darkness. Of course, the problem there is, can you get into the room when there's not literally 500 other people in the same room as you? I did manage to get into that room when there was only about 75, and then came back and tried to walk through that room later and could barely move into the Sistine Chapel. I went through where was it? I want to say San Marco. Well, in San Marco, there were all these cells for the monks with amazing art by Fra Angelico on the walls, and also you had the monk Savonarola's cell. Put a pin on that. We'll come back to that. But I was finding all these reliquaries, these places where bones were kept from saints. Again, death imagery was everywhere. And you don't think about that. When you think about, when we think about the Renaissance, we often think about, nice buildings, beautiful women in the art, order, things like that. But in fact, it's always much different. And at all points in life, we are reminded of death. Another thing I realized was we come with these assumptions of history, things we've heard about from people who've heard about them. So if you watch a Rick Steves travel video about Florence, at some point he's going to make the comment, then this monk Savonarola came around and he burned thousands of works of art, and Botticelli started to burn his own paintings. And I'm in the San Marco cloister where the cells of the different monks were, and I get to Savonarola's cell, and there's a book that I've gotten, that I picked up, that I've since read, and one of the interesting things about this book is it says he didn't do all that stuff. There's so much mythology connected with it. Also, this is a case where the propaganda of the times was so against him that they've constructed him as this ultimate demon, so that whenever you hear about him from certain kinds of sources, they're always going to make him out to be a villain. Whereas, in fact, you have to take into consideration the decadence of the time. So he didn't really get along with the Borgia Pope. If you know anything about what I just said, if you know about history and the Borgias, you're going, oh, what's going on here? But not only that, in this book I have that it was there. Now, was this pro-Savonarola propaganda? It didn't act like it. But they basically said he seems to have done it a couple of times, and he had it as a very specific, like the 7 deadly sins. And he had a couple of pieces of art or even furniture or other things to represent these things. And then he burnt these things as part of a sermon, essentially, out on the streets. And he did this a couple of times. He certainly wasn't the first person to do this. I doubt he was the last. The Protestant reformers up north noticed what he was doing and said to themselves, this guy seems to be a bit like us. And of course, the Protestants went through and got rid of lots of art. And some people can say, oh, those evil Protestants for doing that. But you have to realize the Protestants were worried about people's relationship to objects, which is something to really think about. And sometimes those objects become too sacred. So I'm not going to go into all of that. But the point is this. Savonarola didn't burn thousands of works of art. There is no proof that he burned thousands of works of art. Secondly, Botticelli seems to have kind of subscribed to his theories, but there's no proof Botticelli burned a single work of art. And in fact, his works of art afterwards become a little bit more serious in a sense. But he didn't go around looking for the birth of Venus to burn it or anything like that. And we just you have to ask, this is one of the great things about confronting the reality. In fact, Savonarola was a friend of Lorenzo Medici. So, and they got along. They were able to talk. He wasn't an ignorant, monk coming down preaching like a hellfire and damnation preacher. He was a really educated guy and had really been thinking about things. So we get these ideas, and by being in the place and thinking, and this all started when I was in his cell looking around going like, what do we really know about this guy? And it's like, obviously, that's why I picked up the little book there. I'd always heard these things, but I've also heard other people at least defend him slightly. All of this, there was one other thing that if you know me, you know I'm going to try to do when I arrive somewhere. And that is, are there any puppets here? Is there anything related to puppetry? And I was walking with my friend Jill, and Jill was one of the guys, Italian-Swiss, from the Ticino area in Switzerland, the canton, came down and saw me, and we were walking to meet another friend of mine there, Gianluca, and we were going for the great bistecca alla Fiorentina, which is the Florentine massive T-bone steak, and we were going to split it. It's like about this thick. Absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. Unfortunately, I went with someone, didn't go to one of the tourist places for it, went off the line. That's the benefit of having friends there, which we'll discuss in just one more minute. But we passed a little shop along the way, and my senses immediately went, beep, 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 beep. What's this? And what it was this mask making shop by this kind of legendary Florentine mask maker named Agostino Desi. I didn't go in at the time. I just, as I'm walking somewhere, my radar immediately said, what is that? And I came back to that place a couple days after Jill left. And boy, am I glad I did. I walked in and this place was just filled with these masks. And I was just so incredibly fortunate to find this place and to talk with this guy. But we'll save that and my interview with him and his daughter for the Gravity from Above videos. Also, we'll save the discussion of looking for traces of Pinocchio, which was also really fascinating. We'll save those for my Gravity from Above. There'll be 2 videos on those things over there. And when I found this mask shop and started to look into Pinocchio, I found like, okay, I found the heart of the city. And the heart of the city is not what all the tourists are doing. It is this other history, a history that goes beyond the Renaissance into the present. It's a history that is filled with interesting characters and objects and people and masks and puppets. It's also a history that includes the Renaissance and the Middle Ages and the Roman era. It includes all of these conflicts. It includes great works of art, but it also includes, there's a lot of stuff there that nobody ever talks about because, it's just art. It's just like, okay, that's interesting. But even among those things, I would find statues or paintings or whatever that made me just say, wow, this is incredible, including walking down the street and seeing like more than once I would find a statue making shop on the side of the street, a studio where someone made statues purposely. The thing I loved about finding the masks in Agostino Desio's shop was that it was something being made in Florence now. This is a part of the world now. It includes the past. And in fact, he told me that the original carnivals with masks kind of started in Florence and then migrated over to Venice. So here's the thing. If you really want to connect to the heart of a city, the heart of the city isn't in the buildings. It certainly isn't in the museums. It's not in the restaurants, although you're getting closer. And I did have some very good food, but I'll talk about that over on Georgian Crossroads and beyond. But the heart of the city is people. And it's people you have to get to know. Not the tourist people, not the expats, not the people, just passing through or, whatever. But people connected in some way with either the larger culture, the region, or with that place, that city, that time. So, Gianluca, there were several of these people that were related to, hi guys, you follow me on my channel. And here you are, and here I am, and I'm so grateful. So Gianluca and his friend Icaro were working at this bookstore called Paperback Exchange, which largely sold English-speaking books, but also other books. And there was an aspect of the store, a lot of new books, but also a lot of books that, they're used books and books that I guess you could actually exchange. Then there was Jacopo and his brother Filippo, who came down from Milano and Torino, both northern Italy. Torino, I think, is in Tuscany, but don't quote me on that. But I spent a great day with them. We had some food. They introduced me to different kinds of pasta at the Mercato Centrale, the central market, and we had great talks. Because what's great about meeting people who have followed me on the channel is I already know we can talk because you guys are following these ideas. Let's talk, and that is the point. And then there was Agostino and his daughter Alice, who now runs the mask store. In fact, it's now called Alice's Masks or Alice's Mask. But, in English, but Alice's Mascara or something like that. But, and it's her studio, she teaches people how to make masks. And makes masks. They both do. He's still making masks. The whole time I was interviewing them, they were just working on masks. I realized they've done this their whole lives. They just kept working on these things, and that's how they have so many, is they just never stop. And then through them, they introduced me to another guy. I think his name was Alex. Wow, that's a crazy story related to puppetry and the Lakota Sioux Indians. You'll have to find that story with my Pinocchio story over on Gravity from Above. So, these are just a few of my impressions on my Florentine trip, first 2 weeks of January 2025. This is how I travel. I travel looking. I travel trying to be open to a place. I'm not trying to just fill up a book. I'm not trying to impress people with selfies that prove I was here or there. Yeah, you can take 1 or 2 pictures. I did put some stuff on Facebook or on X, whatever, and I'm making videos here for you. You can see a little bit here. You'll see a lot more in the other videos. There's more visual material, shall we say. Here you're looking at my face, which is not particularly exciting. But the point is, I wanted to tell you the things that sparked ideas. Ideas I will continue to chew on and mull over and think about. So, think about that when you think about, hey, I am doing another gathering in Georgia this summer in July before my birthday, after my birthday on the 22nd, so we'll say from the 20th of July to about the end of the month. We'll talk about the exact dates. Look for that video. But I just wanted to say, hey, traveling is important, especially when you can get a real connection to where you're traveling to, which is what I got, and I felt so happy. And I hope you find these videos interesting. And from Tbilisi, Georgia, where we say Droabit, which means temporarily. Well, we'll just be gone from each other a little while, and then we will meet again. Ciao.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.